Hi everyone, it's James here. Welcome to another video. So this is my now regular end of the month spin update. Just shows some things I've been listening to, and I was thinking of calling this one something like niggling shelf pulls. It's, you know, these records that niggle at you. You've got this constant awareness in the back of your mind about certain records that have been sat in the collection for a long time, haven't been listened to. So finally one day you just get the willpower to finally pull them out and listen to them. So I've got a bit of a selection here of stuff. There's some fairly common, well-known records here and a couple of things that are maybe a little bit more off the beaten track. So let's go through. So in the background, this is Nilsson Schmilsson and his album Third. There's the guy in the back. Beautiful acoustic guitar playing. This record was a gift from Steve Carlson a couple of years ago when he sent me some VCLT, and hadn't listened to it for a while. Really, really beautiful instrumental acoustic playing by this guy. I think he's American or Canadian. Wonderful. Thanks again, Steve. Okay, so we'll start off with an extremely common record, one which is you can find very readily in the UK, and it's just this one, Nilsson Schmilsson. You can pick it up for a couple of quid, and it's just one of those, you know, really common records. I've got a few records by Nilsson, and I'm starting to wonder actually whether I've got too many. I love the Nilsson Sings Newman record. This is a good one. Some of the others are less good really, and I'm thinking maybe it's time to clear some out. This one is known as his classic, and I enjoyed hearing it again. It's got the big hit Without You on it, obviously. Got to Get Up, and various other nice songs. Nilsson's one of those artists you can easily kind of take him for granted, I guess. He's kind of part of the scenery, you know, in a way. If you're a record digger, somebody who goes out digging for records, you'll find his stuff very readily. But this is just one that I was just conscious that I hadn't listened to for ages, and it was just mouldering on the shelf, so I pulled it off and gave it a spin and enjoyed it tremendously. So that'll be staying in the collection. Same for this one too. This is a record I've had for years, and again it's a really common record, so I thought I'd pull it out and give it a spin. RICKIE Lee Jones, I think this was her debut album, and very fine record actually. I'd forgotten how good it was. Contains her well-known song Chucky's in Love, but then it goes on with some absolutely splendid songs. Young Blood, Easy Money, The Last Chance Texaco, very, very poetic, novelistic kind of songs with a really beautiful instrumental backing. All sorts of people on this. Willie Weeks on Fender bass, Steve Gadd, Andy Newmark, Jeff Porcaro on drums. You've got kind of all sorts of people. Randy Newman on synthesizer. You know, she was clearly a very well-connected lady. Trails off a little bit for me on side 2, a couple of kind of slower songs which don't quite do it for me, but in general this is a really, really fine album. Bit kind of Steely Dan in places. Her voice, it reminds me of a kind of precursor to Sean Colvin, who I'm a big fan of. She's a bit more free than Sean Colvin though, a bit more expressive and a bit more abstract as a singer, but the tone of her voice does remind me of Sean Colvin, and it's made me wonder whether perhaps she was an influence on Sean. I don't know for certain, but anyway, yeah, really common record. It had been set on the shelf for a long time, so I thought I'd pull it down. Right, this next one, I hadn't listened to this. I couldn't tell you, I mean, so many years. And it's been in the back of my mind as this record I need to pull out, so I finally did. Now, this is Neu. I think you pronounce it Neu. If you're a Frenchman, you pronounce it Neu. But Neu were of course a German band. They were a spin-off from Kraftwerk. Klaus Dinger and Michael Rother broke away from Kraftwerk quite early on in the early 70s, formed this band called Neu. The word Neu means new in German, and I guess it was them going off in a more kind of rock direction, but not rock as we understand it, you know, not rock as in whatever, you know, Bruce Springsteen and Judas Priest. I guess they pioneered krautrock. And you know, in later years it was massively influential on kind of post-rock and all kinds of things. This is one of the first records that featured the motoric drum beat, even though that's credited often to Jackie Liebezit from Can. I think it was Klaus Dinger on this record, on the first track, Holla Gallo. He came up with this drum beat, which became known as the motoric drum beat. It's got a very particular, it's like a which doesn't vary at all. It just continues doing that, and it becomes very hypnotic. And this record, it's a really interesting mix of very kind of ambient, drifty, kind of floaty kind of sounds that will just float you off into inner space, interspersed with more kind of jagged, abrasive kind of sounds. In fact, on side 2 there's one track that begins with a pneumatic drill, literally, really quite kind of shocking. And I can see why this album was an influence and why this band was an influence on punk. You know, I think bands such as, well, I think people like John Lydon were quite into Noi. Anyway, this record, I bought this, I can see here, from Oxfam, and this would have been in Leeds, back when I lived in Leeds. And in my memory it was a very cheap record, but I'm looking at the price now, £20 I paid for this. So I'm guessing this would have been in the noughties, because back in the 90s when I was on the dole, £20 would have been virtually kind of almost like half a week's money. So I doubt whether I'd have bought it then. It's more likely I bought it in the noughties when I was finally paying my way. But certainly a nice thing to pull off the shelf. You can see here there's some liner notes by Dave Brock from Hawkwind on the back, which I thought was quite a nice touch. So have I got any more facts to let you know about this? 1972, and Noi would go on to a very long and illustrious career. I think, is it Noi 74, which is known as their masterpiece? The binman had just arrived. That was what a big crash was in the background. So anyway, that was their debut album and the only one that I've got by them. So that was nice to revisit. Bit of jazz. I'm trying to catch up with the jazz records, trying to show one in each update. This is the one that I pulled out this month. This is John Coltrane and Giant Steps. Now, I'm assuming this is a reissue. Was there a series called That's Jazz? It's That's Jazz number 9. You can see down here. But it is on Atlantic. It's in a beautiful silvery gatefold, which does slightly remind me of Kiss Double Platinum, it's got to be said. You can't imagine a more different record, really. This album, 1959, in my memory it's always one of John Coltrane's more adventurous, more free ones. It's called Giant Steps, so maybe I'm thinking in my mind it's one of the ones where he jumps off and just, you know, starts going into absolutely mad free jazz territory, but it's not that at all. It's actually a very lyrical, tuneful, pleasant kind of record. Interestingly, it doesn't have Elvin Jones on the drums. It's Art Taylor on drums, apart from one track where he's replaced by Jimmy Cobb, the drummer from Kind of Blue. And it's interesting to hear Coltrane without Elvin Jones beneath him. Elvin Jones obviously had this very thunderous, very kind of deep, dark brown kind of drum sound, whereas Art Taylor and Jimmy Cobb on this, they're much more straight ahead. It's kind of, well, Art Taylor in particular has got quite a light sound. You know, his drums are tuned up, and he's more like Max Roach. He's more in that tradition. So it's quite interesting hearing John Coltrane in that context. It's a lot less thunderous, a lot less fiery. It's more lyrical, and just some beautiful playing on this. On side 2, the track, is it Naima or Naima or Nima? Probably one of my jazz Desert Island discs. It's just so beautiful, so kind of tuneful and lyrical and just kind of wonderful. It does sort of remind you really of how pretty Coltrane can be. In fact, in the liner notes here he talks about being pretty. He said recently, "I'm worried that sometimes what I'm doing sounds like just academic exercises, and I'm trying more and more to make it sound prettier." So, you know, Coltrane had that side to him. He did the Ballads album, and he wasn't just about fire and brimstone and, you know, 80 billion notes a minute. He was able to do things which were more, well, I guess commercial, I guess you'd almost say. But he's playing, still quite busy on that record, but it's definitely an easier proposition than, you know, some of his more kind of abstract works. I've been listening to a couple of those on CD recently, but I think I'll save those for another video. Okay, onwards. So, this record, reasonably recent pickup. I think I picked it up a couple of years back, and it's Badfingse and their album Ass, which came out in 1973. It was the final record they made, or that they released on Apple, and you know, they were destined to have all these awful business troubles later on. And I think this album is, you know, kind of where it started really. I picked this record up in Leeds a couple of years ago from Crash Records on the Hedgerow in Leeds, one of my old stomping grounds. And I found it completely by accident because I decided one day to see if I could pick up some Ringo Starr records. I briefly got it into my head that I needed to get some Ringo into the collection, a project which is now completely receded into the mists of time. So I went over to a box full of Beatles related records and was quite surprised to come across this, because you don't really find Badfinger records in the wild here in the UK. They seem to be quite a rare band, and I really like them. You know, very melodic, very passionate actually. You know, they've got a poppy side to them, they've got a soulful side to them, just great songwriters, great musicianship. I mean, such a tragic story. It's always slightly tainted by your knowledge of that when you're listening to Badfinger. You know, the fact that two of them ended up committing suicide and all this. You know, it's a band with a kind of dark history, but nevertheless, it was one that I was pleased to go back to. And it's, you know, it's always nice to revisit anything on the Apple label, obviously. So yeah, a bit of Badfinger. Right, now this next one I can date near enough how long ago it is that I listened to this. I last listened to this record on the day that I first had an internet chat with Jeff Party. Long-term YouTube and VC viewers will know Jeff. He doesn't make videos as much anymore, but he's still out there. He's still doing content as and when he can. He's just moved house recently. Jeff and I have been good friends now for a number of years here on the VC. We talk a lot on Zoom and Facebook or whatever. And I played this record for the first time on the morning I was due to talk to Jeff for the first time, and that would have been probably about 3 years ago now. So I can kind of date that. And the reason I played it is that Jeff is a big Beach Boys fan, and it just kind of, you know, got me in the mood. This record, it came out in 1977. I think it started out life as a Brian Wilson solo album. It contains all these really, really strange analog synths. You know, it's mainly synth stuff. It's a very, very unusual sounding record, very analog. Brian Wilson's voice is shot to hell on it, but it gives the tracks a really unusual kind of vibe. And yeah, I mean, the songwriting is really good. You've got tracks such as Solar System, I'll Bet He's Nice, which is a really pretty sounding song actually. You've got Honking Down the Highway, which I think there were some lyrics on this record by Roger McGuinn, I think. Bit of a tangled history. Like I said, I think it was meant to be a Brian album, and then it turned into a Beach Boys record. So yeah, it was nice to dig this one back out. This one also was bought in Leeds back in the mists of time. I can't remember which shop it was from, but yeah, it was nice to go back to that one. I'd heard about that record via an interview in probably Q magazine, and it was an interview with Peter Buck from REM. It was a thing where Peter Buck was interviewing Brian Wilson, and Brian Wilson asked him to name a favourite Beach Boys album, and Peter Buck nominated this one, Love You. Did I say the title earlier? Love You by the Beach Boys. And I think Brian was quite surprised by that, because it's not known as being a kind of, you know, it's not kind of up there in terms of Beach Boys records, but I think it is known as being an interesting one. Another niggling shelf pull one. This is an album again I've had for years, and I've got a CD by this guy that I do pull out reasonably regularly because I always enjoy listening to his music, but I hadn't played the vinyl record for a long time. This is David Graham, Dance for Two People. And this record is just, it's a real head mash type of record. David Graham was an incredibly influential folk guitarist on the folk scene back in the 60s. He was a British guy. I mean, he played with John Mayall's Blues Breakers, he played with Alexis Corner, but he basically forged a career as a solo guitarist and became massively influential. His version of the old folk standard Angie, every guitarist under the sun, you know, tried to master that, tried to learn it, and just need to change the record. But Davey, he pioneered a particular guitar tuning, and I think he travelled quite widely, and he introduced all kinds of African scales into folk guitar playing. You know, he was very into Persian music. I mean, he was really into the blues as well, but he was very into kind of Indian stuff, and he was really into the English and the Irish and the Scottish folk music too. So he kind of wrapped it all up together into this dazzlingly virtuosic guitar style where it sounds like three guitarists playing at once, you know. And this record is just incredible. It's got Spanish tunes on it, it's got old Persian things on it, old Persian dances, Turkish songs, English hymns, Scottish folk tunes, and he plays a variety of different guitars. He's pictured there with all the different instruments that he uses on the record. You've got a Ramirez nylon strung flamenco guitar, a Martin high strung guitar, an oud, which is Arabic, a sarod, which is North Indian, and a bouzouki as well, which is Greek. And he just plays all these instruments as if, you know, he was born playing them. It just so accomplished. Again, a bit of a tragic life, I think. I think he wrestled with drug problems and all kinds of kind of issues in later life. But like I said, he was so influential. So it was nice to pull that one out and give it a spin, give it a dust down. This one again had this for years. This was Cobb Records, £3.95. I think I can remember buying this, which is amazing because I bought so many records from Cobb Records in Wales over the years. But I've got a memory of getting this one, seeing it in the racks and going, ooh! It was during a period when I was getting into blues and I was, you know, learning all about it. Bobby Blue Bland, he's called here Bobby, oh I see, Fooling with the Blues, and so they kind of built it into his name there. And this is a collection of early sides by the blues maestro. Semi-obscure name really, a cult name. The Stones were big fans of his back in the 60s. You know, people like Rod Stewart were really into him. You know, Whitesnake covered his song, well not his song, but a song that he'd originally done, which was Ain't No Love in the Heart of the City. And he's been described as one of the greatest blues singers ever. He's just got this really fervent kind of gospel-y kind of voice, which has this great kind of point in it where his voice kind of cracks and it's just really emotional sounding. But in terms of his audience, he never really built up a big audience because I think he kind of fell between various stools. So, you know, his music was a bit too gospel-y for the white blues crowd, you know, back in the 60s with the blues revival movement in the UK. Some of the white blues fans would have found his stuff, you know, too gospel-y. 60s soul fans would have found his stuff too bluesy. It was probably too jazzy, either for the soul or for the blues fans, but it wasn't jazzy enough for the jazz fans, so he kind of fell between all these cracks. But his records are so fantastic to listen to, really well arranged. It's kind of influenced by swing and big band music occasionally. You get these kind of horn charts which are really kind of hip and sassy, you know. But then occasionally he'll do these things which are more kind of driving R&B. His song Cry 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 on this, just fantastic, absolutely belting rhythm and blues, I guess, you know. So yeah, superb. Okay, just three nice quick ones to finish. This is a record that, again, Brian Ferry's solo records are 2 to a penny in the UK. You usually find them in cardboard boxes on the floor. You know, they're kind of like 50p. And I think I've got most of his records, and this is just one that I thought, right, I haven't listened to it for a long time, so I pulled it off the shelf. Another Me, Another Place, and this one came out in goodness knows when, 1974, and it's a covers album. So he does a version of the In Crowd, which is the old mod tune. Not a bad version actually. Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, which is not a song that I particularly like. And a few other things that are pretty good. He does a good version of Finger Poppin' by Ike Turner, which is a nice song. Help Me Make It Through the Night, which is a Chris Christopherson song, that's okay. Bit of a tedious version of You Are My Sunshine at the end of side 1, which he tries to turn it into a kind of Hey Jude type number, but doesn't really work particularly. So yeah, I just thought I'd give it a quick spin. It's not a fantastic record, but it's enjoyable enough. This one I really enjoyed. Steve Miller is an artist whose records I have collected over many years, so I thought I'd pull this one off the shelf. Book of Dreams, which came out, I think it came out in 77, something like that anyway. And I just like Steve Miller. He's a kind of mellow rock and roll kind of guy, you know. His records, or at least from this period, his records have got this kind of veneer of synths on them. You know, they're not nasty synths, but they're definitely kind of mid-1970s synths. and there's slight sort of elements of experimentalism, sort of experimental pop mixed with roots rock. It's this kind of interesting combination. Makes him very listenable. You know, not so much later on as you get kind of into the 80s, his stuff becomes very aggressively commercial. But during this period, I don't know, I just find his records quite compelling. Fantastic song on side 2 of this record called Sacrifice, which is very kind of bluesy and swampy, just has a great feel to it. So, Book of Dreams on Mercury, and at some point I must try and do some kind of Steve Miller collection special. Don't have a huge number of his records, but I've got a fair few of them. And finally, just to finish today, I'm continuing to explore Jethro Tull, which is, like I said in my previous video, I think Steve Carlson sent me 6 Tull records maybe 2 years ago now, 2 Christmases ago now. So I've been working my way through them. This one is Minstrel in the Gallery, 1975, and this one is a bit more approachable than Thick as a Brick, which was the last one that I featured. That one, it's kind of just, you know, it's one song, just part 1 and part 2, and it's quite dense, it's quite labyrinthine, and this one is a bit more approachable. You know, you've got a fair few songs on here, although side 2 you do have this track, Baker Street Muse, which splits down into 4 different tracks. Very interesting lyrically. To me it sounds like him trying to almost do a kind of James Joyce type thing. It's like he's just observing all these people wandering around Baker Street and trying to tell their stories, or trying to imagine what their stories are, but he does it in this very kind of dreamlike, fragmentary language, very elusive, almost like T.S. Eliot, like I said, or James Joyce or someone like that, you know, very dense, very abstract, and the music is really, really interesting. Changes all the time, never kind of settles down, it's always moving, he's always introducing new themes into it, and new melodies and new rhythms, counter rhythms. Fantastic musicianship as well. So with that one I am continuing my Tull exploration, and in the next video I hope to be talking about another of their records. Okay folks, so I will love you and leave you there, and thanks to everybody for watching and commenting as usual, and I'll see you on the next video. Take care. Bye bye.